مسجدشو میرفته نمازشو میخونه، ولی الان همه چی تعطیل از جانب خدا دیگه. یعنی اصلا وقتی میگی خدا، میگن خدا یعنی چی؟ دیگه شما حرف ملاها رو نزن، شما حرف آخوندا رو نزن. و جمهوری اسلامی فقط بر اساس کشتن و رعب و وحشت. و نصفی از جمعیت این جامعه زنا هستن. از ابتدایی که روی کار اومد، اولین کاری که کرد قانون خانواده رو لغو کرد و زنان رو از یک سری حق و حقوقشون محروم کرد و از جمله اینکه زنا رو خواست خانه نشین کنه، چون از زنا میترسه. ملت ایران بیدار شین. نونمون رو بردن، ناموسمون رو بردن، وطنمون رو بردن، اعتبارمون رو بردن، امنیتمون رو بردن، جان عزیزانمون رو گرفتن. الان ما برای چی واسطادیم؟ منتظر چی هستیم؟ چی میخواد دیگه اتفاق بیفته که نیفتاده؟
We hope you enjoyed lunch. Our next panel, The New Age Revolution, How Technology Can Help Iranians Win, will explore the role of technology from social media to mobilizing Iranians abroad, to innovative solutions like Starlink and cryptocurrencies, and empowering the tech-savvy Iranian pro-democracy movement to achieve its goals. Joining us for this panel are Mehdi Yahyanejhad, a tech entrepreneur and internet freedom activist, Len Khodorkovsky, a former senior advisor to the US envoy for Iran, and Sarah Raviani, an Iranian-American activist involved in supporting the Massa Act. The panel is moderated by CNN's Artemis Moshtaghian.
Hello. Hello, thank you for joining us today on this very important discussion. Hello. 1 second. On this very important discussion on technology and freedom and the protest movement taking place in Iran, I am joined by a great panel, activist, internet freedom entrepreneur, and former state advisor. So what we're going to be looking at is the difference between what we've traditionally seen in the internet and social media in protest movements in the Arab Spring, where Twitter and Facebook were main contenders. But now, as the landscape has changed, Iran is now mostly looking at different platforms, at Instagram, Clubhouse, and Twitter being used, Twitter Spaces. And we're going to be exploring just what technology and how freedom plays into technology in Iran. We're faced with a government that conducts cyber attacks and also internet shutdowns, blackouts from critical areas in the country where we can't get information. And so technology and freedom are intertwined very intimately. And I'm hoping this panel will lay more out there for us to discuss. So first and foremost, what's top of mind for all of us is what's going on in Israel. We cannot get away from that. So I wanted to take a moment and first speak to Sarah and see how she is using technology as social media to connect second generation Iranian Americans here in the US, and also connecting what's going on in Israel with what's happening over there.
Thank you so much. I want to start by saying that the people of Iran and Israel are depending on all of us, and that's why we are all here today, because we all share that same conviction. So I am very honored and proud that Nufti has allowed us to take place in this really important conversation. Last weekend, we saw the horrible Iran-backed terrorist attack committed by Hamas in Israel. And we were able to host a Twitter space recently and discuss with people on the ground in Israel, specifically the youth of Israel. And they discussed with us the horrors that took place on that day and how terrifying it was for all of them. And it's very different when you're seeing this on the news versus when you're using technology and social media specifically to discuss these topics with not only the people inside of Israel, but also the people inside of Iran. I'm in a very unique position where I do have access to these people because we use Twitter and social media to connect with all of them. So it's been very eye-opening, very jarring at the same time, but also beautiful that we have this channel to connect with all the world, really. And that's something that has played a pivotal role in my driving force for why I decided to engage in legislative advocacy.
So social media has become a go-to platform for Iranians. They're looking for unbiased information, for sharing videos and images that would have otherwise not been put out there by the government or any other news agency because of censorship and just the government's cracking down. I want to know each of your involvement in what you think about social media and freedom and what that means to what your platform is and what you're pursuing. Len, I will go with you first.
Well, I think I want to start out with taking a step back and looking at the power of technology in general. So we are at a point in time in history where technology is integrated into just about every aspect of our lives, everything from our daily lives, through our cell phones or smart refrigerators, to the lives of our nations through military technology, satellites, information technology. It's pervasive. Semiconductor chips are driving everything with essentially on and off switch. So that means that the stakes of ensuring that the good guys are innovating and proliferating technology are going to determine the status of freedom in the next generation. The way to secure freedom for the next generation is to secure technology. Now, it's a double-edged sword. Technology can be used for good, and technology can be weaponized against humanity. Those are the stakes. There's no middle ground. I am encouraged that this generation is growing up with technology in their bloodstream. It's really important that the way this generation evolves technological tools is rooted in democratic values. It's rooted in respect for the rule of law, for the respect for human rights, respect for property rights, respect for all the things that we associate with freedom. Because authoritarian regimes like the one in Iran, the one in China, of course, all North Korea are not going to sleep. They are developing AI, their own technologies, whether we like it or not, and it's critical that the United States and the free world drives the rules under which technology is developed. Now we can, and I think we need to focus on that because the stakes are literally freedom and oppression.
It's exactly that. Technology and freedom have a reciprocal relationship. Freedom promotes technological progress, and technology therein promotes a free society, which embetters society in general. But it can be used in the ways that you're saying. I want to look at the different types of platforms that we have, the diversity of the different tools that social media has opened doors for Iranians. Now with Mehdi, what you can share with us beyond WhatsApp, beyond voice notes and Instagram and Insta stories, which for me personally was where I got a lot of my information from during the protests last year. What more can you tell us about the apps out there and the diversity?
Sure. I want to start from a little bit of history of what was happening in Iran. So Iran got connected to internet back in 1992, roughly that time. And from day one, when Iran connected to internet, the issue of censorship and free speech became an issue. Actually, there is a story that I'd like to talk about. When there were mathematicians and physicists from Iran, they went to Vienna to get connection to a center in Vienna from Iran. So that was the first connection Iran got to worldwide internet. And as a part of that contract, there was one mention that if you are getting connected to World Wide Web, you have to let people use this as an uncensored internet, or whatever it was called back then. When these people went back to Iran with this contract, nobody was ready to sign it because it said, I mean, of course, the two words within this long contract became an issue. Finally, of course, they found somebody, an official, to sign this who said, like, we don't have to care about this. But what I want to say, from day one, the censorship was an issue, and the history of it proved that internet played an important role. And the achievement, I think, I mean, in Iran, we've seen is that a lot of people are well informed today. I think what we could say, most Iranians are pretty informed about their options, about what is going on in Iran, about what's going on globally. I have one example. I was talking to somebody in Iran, and I said, oh, I live in this neighborhood in LA, and he told me, like, oh, have you been to Gold Gym? And I said, I've been by it, but I haven't been there. So it's like somebody in Iran is so informed that, I mean, knows like about neighborhoods in LA. Just that's one example, but what I want to say, the internet and of course satellite TVs to some extent have helped Iranians to be so informed about issues globally and also in Iran that at the moment, I think we are past the point of informing people. Most people in Iran are informed. I think the today's challenge is how to bring change. It's not really how to inform them. Maybe 20 years ago, 30 years ago, that was an issue, but today that's not the case. Just in going back to your question, today Iranians use a number of social platforms, social media platforms. They use Twitter to have strong political discussions. I think a lot of the political discussions are happening on Twitter, and people who want to have an influence on political issues have to be there and have to be part of that discussion. Instagram is bringing a lot of cultural change. I think what happened, I would say, what we saw in the master revolution, it was partly due to all these teenagers and young men and women in Iran during COVID sitting at home, being on Instagram, and totally like experiencing a different life, a life that they can have. So they saw all these stories, what people were sharing from outside world. And there was a huge cultural shift between those 2 or 3 years that was brought because of Instagram. Of course, a lot of people are using WhatsApp for communication. They use Signal for safe communication. They use Clubhouse to have more in-depth conversations, which is, again, I would say, a safer platform because Iranians are, when they see each other, they are far more polite than when they are just tweeting and writing to each other. So Clubhouse has become a relatively safer space to have more in-depth conversations about politics. So they are using all these platforms together to achieve, I would say, to create a different narrative, which is very different from what Iranian government wants to create. And as we've seen, the barandazi or change, regime change narrative, which has been created in the past, I would say, past 10 years, it has become so common among the population that this has become the dominant voice, and this is what everybody is calling. I think the challenge now that what we're going to see is how to achieve that. So that's going to where we're going to see the shift and the discussions on how to achieve that shift.
You bring up a good point about how the young culture inside Iran is using social media to let us look into their lives. And this has created a big impact on second generation and just people in the diaspora in Europe as well, We had Sarina Ismailzadeh, who was singing along to an American song and vlogging from her bedroom that looked just like anybody's here in the States or in Europe. And then you had Hamid Reza Ruhi, a motorcyclist who was doing TikTok lip syncing like many of us during COVID. So it personalized, it humanized the Iranian youth. And using these diverse platforms, Sarah, I want you to tell me what it was like for second generations individuals in the US and Europe in kind of anchoring their identity with who they are with the people back in Iran, and what that meant for you and people like you that you've spoken to.
So social media was very pivotal in, I think, mobilizing and inspiring second-generation Iranian Americans and Iranians in the diaspora to mobilize and feel connected to our roots. Because, you know, oftentimes it's very hard for many of us who have not been to Iran in a long time or have never been to feel connected to home. But with social media, we were able to see an inner look into these young people's lives. We got to see what their lives were like, what their interests were. We got to hear from them directly. And for me personally, it was very, it set my soul on fire, to be quite frank. I would look at the videos of them and their TikToks and their tweets even, and I just felt like those were my brothers and sisters inside of Iran. The average age of protesters inside of Iran is 15 to 25 years old. I'm 25. And so it felt like there was finally this missing link that felt fulfilled by seeing their social media. And as trivial as social media may be looked at here in the West, it's so different for the people of Iran. It gives them an outlook into what, you know, a democracy and freedom actually means. And so that's why it's so important, and it's so beautiful that we're able to connect with these young people for the first time, it feels. And they join in on our Twitter spaces, and they speak with us, and they talk to us, and they let us know, and they are so informed, like you said. I've been working on a bill, it's called the MASA Act, S2626, and it just recently passed the House of Representatives, and the night it passed, we did an impromptu Twitter space to speak with everybody, and the youth of Iran joined that Twitter space, and they said, this is the first time that we're waking up to good news in a long time. And, you know, hearing that, it's like, it's so inspiring, because it's so hard to put yourself out there and to become an activist and to, you know, get criticized online. But when you realize who you're doing it for, it makes it all worth it. And those are the kids inside of Iran that we're fighting to make their voices heard here in the United States.
On that point, and looking at human rights activists and the interplay of technology, Len, I would love for you to talk about how allies are working, utilizing the power of technology, whether it's social media in numbers, because there are 24 million Instagram users alone in Iran, and 64 million in all of MENA in the Middle East. Turkey is a high social media consumer and utilizer, and Iran is quite up there. Look at every Angelina Jolie post. There's going to be an Iranian at the bottom saying something.
Or at the top.
Or at the top,
Yeah.
or at the top. But I'd love for you to talk about how governments and human rights activists, how they're utilizing this big movement that tech is at the core of.
Wow, this is such an important question, and I love what you said, Sarah. I think there is the way young people always received information and were able to create change. Now, today it's Instagram and various other apps, but you know, I'll go back to my old days. For those of you that don't know, I came from the Soviet Union. I grew up in the Soviet Union before the Berlin Wall fell. And the way people received information in those days was shortwave radio, or, most people didn't have TVs, but people always found ways to receive information somehow. And that information from Voice of America in those days, or Radio Free Europe, or people would yearn to find little strands of accurate information of what was going on the outside. Now that's a lot easier today because of, as you said, Iranians generally are finding their information, regardless of the regime's attempts to shut it down. But what is important is, and I want to bring this kind of back to what to do about it now. So sharing information and access to information is critical, of course. We need to make sure we preserve that and increase those channels. Not just prevent the current channels from being free of interference, but create other channels. And each of them have their own audiences. I think it's also important for us to understand that not everybody's on Instagram, believe it or not. People consume information in different ways. Don't underestimate the power of traditional media. Most people still get information from TV. So just because we have these new tools doesn't mean we should throw out the old tools. I would say, if we can communicate to them with flags and hand signals, we should do it, and they should do it. So that's one thing. High tech is very attractive and powerful, but low tech is just as powerful. So that's one thing. The other thing that I want to address is how to use technology. So the way I look at it is there are three ways. They're offensive, defensive, and force multipliers. What I mean by offensive ways of using technology is driving the agenda. Now, that can be on social media, that could be making sure your messages get out and your narrative is the one that captures people's attention or at least counters the bad guy's narrative. But that also means disrupting the bad guys from creating their narratives. Now, that can be done technically, that can be done with messaging, but young people are very creative, and they should use their ingenuity to prevent their oppressors from using technology to oppress them. Now, there are a number of ways to do that, and I just want to, I know I'm kind of going on, but I think...
I want to actually ask, what are some ways that you've seen that they've done that they've stepped in?
So I think confusing the regime, obviously the Iranian regime, the Chinese regime, Russians, North Koreans, all of these bad guys, they use technology to surveil people, to track them, and bully them or prevent them from speaking out or acting out. I think it's pretty easy for this young generation of even amateur hackers to confuse the regime's ways of tracking them, of disrupting them. So I think that kind of an approach is absolutely necessary. And we're not just talking about like communication, but disruption of the regime's plans to deploy sophisticated technology against the population.
In the form of cyber attacks?
You said it.
Well, that's what you were.
You know what? In government, we're too polite to say things the way they really are. But I forgot, I'm not in government anymore. But yes, look, yes, of course, everybody knows that. Yes, hack away, confuse the bad guys, make it more difficult to oppress you. So that's one thing. Defensive is kind of using similar tools to prevent the regime from tracking you, to make sure that their information is inaccurate, to disrupt the technology that they're receiving from outside of Iran, look, the Israelis have been very good at doing stuff like this, but I think people on the ground can do it, and I think people in the diaspora who are very resourceful and should help the people on the ground to do that. And finally, force multipliers. By that I mean the people on the ground themselves need help. They need help from allies on the outside. And at the same time, the allies on the outside can't do this alone either. They need help from people on the inside. So I think it's critical to build bridges, trusted bridges, between the people inside and people on the outside, and to the extent possible, have a technological strategy as to how best to deploy things that are available and provide things that are not available. So with that, I'll hand it back to you, but there's so much to talk about.
When you first said disrupting, mainstream media, the first thought that came to mind is how one of the channels was hacked, and there was a message that was put on the screen, and everybody was kind of shocked at what are we seeing here. So you said that sometimes a lot of people still consume media and news from traditional media, television, radio, etc. So that's what went in my mind initially, but there are many other forms, like you said. I think touching upon your force multipliers, I actually want to take it to Mehdi, and you brought up that social media platforms could be used for mobilization, organization, and network building. I think it is currently doing that, but there are ways that it would get hindered. People would be misled on where to go, where to meet, and I just want you to talk about that, it definitely touches upon force multipliers and social media, but we'll come back to that, and just hoping you could touch upon that.
So right now, the way Iranians, especially from outside, they're trying to make change, bring change inside Iran, and bring people to the streets is through what's called Farakhan in Persian, or call to come to the streets, call for protest. And so far, from what we've seen, this hasn't worked. The large protest that we've seen usually has happened organically inside Iran, is happened in the aftermath of major event, I would say, traumatic event inside Iran, and people have come out just because of the anger at that moment or the impact they've seen. So far, we have not been successful in influencing from outside to get people to come out based on for a specific day, specific time. And there are reasons for that. Part of it is, of course, this is done in open, and of course, the Iranian government is aware of all these, and they have developed all sorts of tactics how to defeat this type of calls. From mass arresting activists to bringing all their, IRGC and Basij and everybody to the street. And so basically, we're using social media just in one way to make changes in Iran, to bring change in Iran. But this is not the only way. And we are totally ignoring how we can organize and mobilize people, just like we really haven't looked into it. There is, of course, a long history of using technology tools, not social media necessarily, technology tools in democracies to organize people. For example, Bernie Sanders, it was one of the most successful ones who used online tools to organize large numbers of people with a very small number of his staff. Of course, he failed because of his, different reasons, but he did manage to do it successfully. Of course, other campaigns have done it successfully. It's a different environment, of course, doing it in a democracy that there's no risk of getting arrested and so on. It's a very different story from what is happening in Iran. But I believe we can look at what's been done in other places to use technology to mobilize and organize, mostly in secret, not necessarily play our card in public. And this is something I think technologists should look into, to just see what kind of the platforms we have to develop to allow people to brainstorm for solutions, to let people to come together and make groups, online groups, how to anonymously trust others, how to build trust networks anonymously, and ultimately how to collect resources anonymously, whether it's donations, cryptocurrency, whatever it is, and also do the similar type of work within Iran, just build a small number of groups, maybe groups of 5, groups of 10, who could focus on very specific tasks in Iran. I mean, just to give you an example, why should IRGC or Basij in all these protests, they should be able to drive these motorbikes in the streets without any restriction, with no blockade or anything. It just takes a small group of people to go and block a number of streets. So these are not happening. Nobody's planning for these things. Nobody's organizing for these things. I think the beginning, first we need to have the conversations. We need to shift our mindset and accept that what we've done so far hasn't worked. The type of calls we've had on social media to call people to come to the street hasn't really worked. Sometimes I give an example. This is like we are at war, and we are bringing all the like soldiers, foot soldiers, to the front without calling our artillery. This is like we are sending people to great risk without having the preparation, without preparing the ground. And we have to come to the understanding what that planning needs to be, to have the cities in Iran ready. Then when people come to the street, they will be safer, there will be less risk, they won't lose that many people each time they come out. And of course, and each time you have protests, it will be tied to specific goals and objectives. So these are all the conversations we need to have. Part of it is politics, part of it technology, but I think it needs to start from the political side. We need to figure out what we need to do, and then once we figure that out, technologists will be able to transfer and convert to technologies that would help to achieve that.
Mehdi, what do you say about people far off in other cities, not main cities like Tehran, but like Amol and other cities that don't have internet accessibility as easily as the main city centers? VPN is not as pervasive as you'd think. So in order to get access to mobilization efforts or messaging from other either protesters or other people inside Iran or outside, what can be done to overcome that, and what has been done?
Absolutely. So I think VPN efforts have been, important effort in past 10 years. I mean, a fair amount of, US government funding goes to those initiatives. We need definitely more resources going to it, but VPN shouldn't be the only thing. I think we need to look at alternative technologies. At the moment, I think Starlink is an important technology, it needs to be out there. I think we need to have a goal of getting 10,000 Starlink terminals distributed to all the cities in Iran. Each city at least to have 10 nodes to function during internet shutdown. And I think part of the people who are in DC and can lobby for these things will be to just go to the Congress and ask for a significant amount of funding that would support directly go to purchase and distribution of a Starlink in Iran. I think this is an achievable goal. I believe, unfortunately, the current administration, most likely for political reason, hasn't done anything in this regard. And this is something I think Iranian Americans can come forward and say, look, you say you don't want to have a regime change in Iran, but this is not regime change. This is just enabling ordinary Iranians to stay connected to outside world during internet shutdown, and to be able to report mass crackdowns and mass killings when there is a mass protest, and basically the reason Iranian government shuts down internet is because they want to kill a large number of people without any pressure from outside. So having these Starlinks distributed within Iran definitely would help and would lower that risk.
So one thing I want to point out that I had heard is towards the end of last year, when there were still protests, there were a number of Starlink devices that were brought into Iran, but they were privatized very quickly by the people that brought them in, thereby monopolizing the use of people on the ground. That's just what I heard. It is an admirable approach, but these are the kind of issues on the ground that we have to contend with. One thing that I want to discuss with you is we touched upon, or Mehdi brought up, the US's involvement with funding technology. I know that there's oh my goodness, I forgot the name, but there's an act or a legislative law right now where governments, US companies can work technology-wise with Iran. For example, Google's Jigsaw is starting up VPN accessibility for large swaths of Iranians. Can you talk to us about the US's involvement with giving the green light in that regard for funding, in a sense, technology for Iran?
I wish I could just, draw up a formula that works in every scenario, but Washington is, works a certain way where, it's not the technology or it's not the specific virtue of a particular piece of legislation or policy, it's who you know. Sorry, that's the way Washington works. And it doesn't matter if you have a genius idea or the most laudable cause that you're trying to convince people in Washington to embrace and fund. There's plenty of money. The reality is, number one, it's who you know. So that's the way it works. Number two, I think success matters. I think the success of Massa Act, for example, where politicians can take credit for something, is a way to pitch these kinds of solutions to people who are generally, interested in self-preservation and self-interest. That is, people just want to get elected. People want to keep their jobs. People want to get great reviews, at these agencies. So nothing succeeds like success. So I think strategically, what would be, I think, valuable is to use the success of being able to push through this piece of legislation, for example. And when you go and you try and convince people in power that you're asking them to do something that you think is, great, they may or may not care, but they will care if you can show that you were successful. And because you were successful, that means it gives them the opportunity to take credit for it and go to the mic and tell their constituents that they've been successful at something. It makes them sound really good on TV. Speaking of TV, sorry, just one more point that I want to make. One of the first things somebody told me when I came to Washington, and I'm not a government creature, I came from the private sector when I worked, when I entered the Trump administration. One of the first things somebody told me is, you know how to get policy through Washington, you know how to have successful policy initiatives in Washington? On TV. Because bureaucracies take time. There are multiple interests. Some people might conceptually be aligned with you, but the will to execute something is a lot harder than it seems. However, there's nothing like the pressure that comes from coverage on TV specifically and media that motivates people to do something, because their politicians are fearful of negative coverage. They don't want to be seen as lagging behind, the momentum of where things are going. And I recommend using this psyops in Washington to advance, whether it's technology or policy initiatives or anything else. Now, that doesn't sound very techy, but that's how Washington works, and regardless of what it is that you're pushing through, you know, it's human nature. Use human nature to your advantage.
Len, you're our traditional media representative up here.
I was also going to add that it starts with all of us here in this room and those that are watching online. To be a part of that change, I think we were once a very politically aloof community, whether it be from trauma or, you know, just not wanting to get involved because we felt like our voices weren't heard. If there is something that you want to advocate for, you have to be the one to make that change. You have to start calling your lawmakers. It's something that we did with the MASA Act in specific. We have a group of activists. We affectionately refer to ourselves as the MASA Act Army. There's many in this room and many that are watching online. And we've mobilized, we've put aside our differences. We come from all walks of life. Several of us are young, some are older, and we just really rallied behind this piece of legislation to get it passed through call lists, connecting with one another, and we use technology to do all of that. But it starts with making your voice heard and taking the initiative to do that, like Len mentioned, because believe it or not, lawmakers do not like negative press whatsoever. It's completely true. And even just one negative tweet will get their attention. You think that your voice is very inconsequential, but that's not true. They're reading all of their tweets. I was on the Hill yesterday, and somebody from a Senate office told me, they were like, we see all of your tweets, and we see that our tweets on Iran policy are performing significantly better than our tweets on anything else. And we don't have very many Iranian American constituents. So it's just the power of social media and technology and making your voices heard. And I would like to applaud the MASA Act Army for making a difference and finally stepping up to be a voice for the voiceless inside of Iran.
I would just add a note to that. I've been, I know a lot of these people that, say stuff in Washington and try and take credit for things. I've been amazed how many new Iran experts have emerged in Washington, which is very telling, actually. There are many politicians that have, don't know Iran from Iraq, but the success of a political initiative. Also, look, I mean, the woman life freedom movement, of course, captured people's imagination. There's nothing like popular culture to put things on people's, radar. Look, the other practical thing to consider is, we're looking at politicians as the audience to persuade. Most of their staff is like 25 and younger. So who do you think tracks their accounts? Who do you think tweets for them? Who do you think, tells them what people are talking about? It's young staffers. Now, don't ignore them. I think it's just as important, if not more important, to reach the staffs of people in Washington than, the players themselves.
That being said, I actually want to throw it back to you, Sarah, and see how you got involved with being politically active and being vocal on social media, and how social media or technology in a broader sense started that for you.
Well, I was never politically active, like I think many people in this room. I was not interested really in politics. It's the human rights that really, like I said earlier, set my soul on fire. I saw the young people inside of Iran that were giving up their lives fighting for freedom, and I was sitting here comfortably in America wondering, what was so different? What is so different between me and those young women and men inside of Iran that were risking their lives? And why couldn't I be their voice? What was stopping me? So I decided to just start advocating for the MASA Act. It's our, first piece of legislation that we started working on, and it's become my passion project, along with the passion project of so many other Iranian American activists. And a lot of us refer to ourselves as overnight activists because we gave up, doing like fun stuff in our free time, and we spend a lot of time here now in Washington, D.C. instead. So that's kind of what started it for me, and we just connected through Twitter mostly. We started connecting with one another. We use the hashtag MASA Act on Twitter. If you go look up that hashtag, it has hundreds of thousands of tweets because people from, like I said, all walks of life have really, really rallied behind this legislation to support it because it is the first, grassroots supported legislation that I've seen. So that's kind of how we started, and then we just do call lists, call campaigns, tweet campaigns, we attend town hall meetings, we come out here to Washington, D.C. to advocate, and it's just regular, everyday Iranian Americans and even some non-Iranian Americans, which is so special. We've been able to bridge the gap between so many different communities of Americans of non-Iranian descent, Israelis, like I mentioned earlier. There's people from all walks of life that have really come, and they're, I think, ultimately kind of inspired by our story because it's very unique coming from a community that was, like I said, so politically aloof. And so every week I tweet out call lists and tell people like, hey, go call so-and-so senator, go call so-and-so representative. I teach people how to organize. I consider myself a grassroots organizer. And it's really inspiring to, see everyone empowering people to make their voices heard. I actually have an example of a call list that we have printed out. It just looks like this. It's very simple. And they're over at my table right there in the middle. And I would love if all of you would come by and stop and talk to me after so I could show you guys our call list and our letters that we have going out to different senators to get the MASA Act passed through the Senate, just like we did in the House.
Mehdi, I want to take it back a bit more broadly and talk about internet censorship and the consequences and what people in the diaspora can do in vocalizing their concern, and also on the ground when you're talking to people once they've come out of an internet shutdown, for example, what it is that has happened and what's the consequence that we're seeing of such acts. It's humanitarian violations, it affects economic growth and everything. If you could just touch upon that, we get an intimate example.
So the main reason for internet shutdown or internet slowdown, internet disruption, whatever is happening during protests, is a number of things. Of course, Iranian government mainly wants to block images and videos getting out of Iran. This is the news cycle outside Iran highly depends on videos and images getting to them quickly and broadcasting them. And this is Iranians inside Iran, of course, are watching these videos through Iranian channels, mostly Iranian Mano 2, Iranian International, and so on. And this feeds into the protests. When Iranians see, okay, there are videos coming out, they are more likely to go on the streets. Once Iranian government slows down internet, these videos don't get out. And as a result, people feel that maybe there is nothing happening. Maybe it's just everything got shut down, or people went back to their houses. So that's one reason they disrupt internet during protests. And that's why it's vital to have those Starlinks or to have connections that don't depend on Iranian government infrastructure to be able to send those videos to outside world. Another reason is to just disable communications within Iran. I mean, a lot of the times when people go on the streets, there are encouragements from their friends in the neighborhood, like somebody texts others on WhatsApp and so on, let's just get out and do something. And once those connections are disrupted, people lose the ability to organize locally, and they are less likely to come to the streets. As a result, Iranian government, has been very, of course, this is their plan. They've done with what they call halal internet or intranet, or they have different names for it. They have moved most of their services to inside Iran. So the banks, all the servers that used to be hosted outside Iran, they are inside Iran. And the primary reason for this is when there is an internet shutdown, they can keep the internet running inside Iran, so the economic cost for the regime would be lower. So the banks would run, the the people can pay their bills to the city or municipality and so on, so they can pay their bills. So basically, Iranian government much easily can just shut down internet and let the intranet run inside Iran. I think what we need to do, we need to make that, of course, create those alternative methods of access, whether it's Starlink or other technologies. We also need to build technologies that will work when there is an internet shutdown, but intranet is running inside Iran, so people can communicate through that intranet, but safely. So it's peer-to-peer connections or whatever the technologies will be. That's one other, I think I haven't seen, there are a number of groups working on this, but so far I haven't seen, I would say, a product that would really work. And probably it's lack of resources, lack of, also I think a lot of these groups are actually not Iranians, to be honest. I think you need Iranians in those groups to understand the context, to understand what's going on inside Iran.
When you say they're not Iranian, what are they?
They are, I mean, they are international groups, and I mean, a lot of them are really, their heart is in good place. They want to help, they want to do something. But it's just kind of like they don't understand the context. If you ask them about Iran, they won't really distinguish between Iran and North Korea, or like, I mean, Iran is and for a lot of, I mean, people who are not really like familiar with Iran's politics on a daily basis, understanding Iran is difficult. Iran is a country has a very brutal dictatorship, but at the same time, because of culture of the people, because of the history of Iranians in terms of technology, in terms of education, Iranians are extremely tech savvy in terms of adopting new technologies. They are probably faster than Americans, probably faster than many other nationalities. I mean, in most technologies, like people in Iran just get on them immediately. They have no, I mean, in some other places, privacy is an issue. People have other hesitations. In Iran, people just jump on these technologies and use them day one, and they are so passionate. For example, Clubhouse is probably more popular inside Iran than it is in America. I mean, most Americans, if you ask them about Clubhouse, they don't know what it is. So this is the context, and people can understand. Really, sometimes it's hard, even for technologists who are not necessarily understanding the political context of Iran, to understand that these people are ready to take a lot of risk. I mean, sometimes it's like, I mean, I have to like people say, oh, are people going to really use a Starlink? I say, like, yes, if they have it, they are going to use it. They've been using these satellite dishes, even though it's been illegal. They've been using it forever. If they've been, everything in Iranian life is illegal. I mean, they've been doing all, I mean, from not wearing their hijab to, I mean, all sorts of things. I mean, on daily basis, the things that they do that's illegal is probably like, I mean, they could end up in jail. Most of them can end up in jail if the law is implemented as, I mean, if the state would have the power to implement the law as they wish. So that's I think the challenge. We need more resources. We need more Iranian engineers involved in these issues to make an impact.
On the inside and outside?
I think outside primarily, but Iranians inside have to help too. I think of course it's going to be harder, but they have to be ready to help. It takes us that. The Iranians who are inside, they have the insight, they have the info, even just sometimes bits and tips of like, just if they give us some indication what's going on, how the censorship regime is implemented, how the Iranian government is monitoring text. For example, just back in the Green Movement, just one engineer who had moved to the US just like a few months before I met him, he pulled me aside after a panel. Actually, I gave a panel in university, and he pulled me aside and said, "Look, I worked in a company that was censoring, basically monitoring the text." And he told me, like, the way they monitor the text, they they look at for keywords, not only keywords, they also see how many people you are forwarding these messages to. So they run these filters that would say, if you are running a slogan against the regime and also you're forwarding it to a large number of people many times, then you become a target, so they go after you. And these things that are implemented internally, and I also mentioned that there's a Chinese company that's competing there, so basically they are implementing in both using an Iranian company and also a Chinese company. So these are just like knowing that kind of information, I think it's helpful to just say, I mean, then we started, of course, putting out the messages that stop using text in Iran. I mean, just move to WhatsApp, Signal, whatever it is. And those are much safer compared to basic text, because there's text is, Iranian government is reading them, is already implementing technologies to totally monitor text and so on. So these are, I think, type of information that Iranians inside are aware of it, and considering that most Iranians inside Iran are against the regime, they are completely happy to share that information if they can trust someone outside Iran.
Len, you had something
Yeah,
to say?
no, I think all of these are kind of like important insights into how people communicate. I would like to cut to the chase, if you don't mind. So why do we care about technology? Who's talking to whom? Who can track whom? There's one big objective here that everybody's after, or at least people here and aligned people. We want the regime on the ash heap of history. Okay, that's the prize at the end of the road, right? You want the regime gone. How do people with limited resources, how do they make the regime go away? Well, there are revolutions and all of these big things that everybody covers and make movies about. And those things happen in different ways in different places and have different dynamics. I think what the people of Iran and people with limited resources anywhere can do and should focus on is three things in my mind. It's confuse, it's disrupt, and it's frustrate the oppressor, create ways that are extremely frustrating for the regime, very disruptive for the regime, to do what the regime wants to do, and send the regime to the ash heap of history by 1,000 cuts. Everybody can do something. Even one person in an apartment or in a basement or wherever they may be are equipped to disrupt, confuse, and frustrate their oppressor in many different ways. Some people do it symbolically by taking off the hijab. Some people create catchy videos with infographics. Other people can hack into the government servers. Other people can, even if they're in solitary confinement in Evin prison, can frustrate their oppressors from wherever they are. All of those things add up to change. I don't know if you guys may have heard, the parable of like the butterfly that flaps its wings on one side of the world and eventually creates a tsunami on the other side of the world. I think that is very applicable here. There's single acts of disruption, confusion, frustration of the oppressor lead to monumental changes, and people are not powerless. Everybody has the power to do it at their level. Some people have access to technological tools. Other people have access to their talents in other ways. They can speak, they can write, they can persuade, and they can frustrate. So I think if there's anything that I want to leave you with, it's not always the big thing that wins the day. It's lots of little things. And everybody can do something little. Everybody here can do something little. Everybody in Iran can do something little. Everybody can get 10 friends to do something little. And eventually, all of those things will add up to major change. And I think that's an important thing for us to remember.
And technology. And like you alluded to, technology is at the core of that. The government is using technology to do the things that they do. And then, people in Iran and outside of Iran can utilize technology to protest and make their voices heard. Thank you so much. I mean, are there any other points that you guys want to make, actually?
I wanted to just say really quickly, I'll leave you guys with this. Keep the pressure up. We have to make our voices heard, and it starts with everyone here in this room, everyone that's watching online. It is so important to advocate for what you believe in, no matter how small of a difference you think you're making. You are making a change. Just like Len said, I want to echo, it starts with everyone. You can't wait for someone else to make these changes for you. You have to be the change that you want to see in this world, and that starts with every single one of us here in this room and every single person that's watching online. So, and I want to thank everyone that already has, because by being here, you are, being a part of the change that you want to see, but there's so much more that we can do, and we've built an incredible advocacy framework. It's become popular now to talk about Iran, like Len mentioned, and so we really need to capitalize on this moment to be a voice for the people of Iran and start making changes that we are able to from the outside.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it. Thank you for your time. Oh, questions, yes. The person in the back.
Thank you. Well, thank you, first of all, Sarah, and to everybody in your age group for doing everything that you're doing. You're really an army, and I hope everybody who's watching what you guys are doing from all over the world, the students all over the world, can learn from the Master Army. Thank you also to our experts, but maybe I misunderstood, and I want to check with you, because if I misunderstood, maybe other people misunderstood too. I heard from what you were saying that the revolution in Iran, or the uprising and everything, they're not as organized, or they were not, Farrakhan or calling people to the streets didn't work, or they should have done something to stop the Sepah from coming with their motorcycles, or they should do 1 billion cuts. I feel it's a little bit unfair. I feel the people of Iran did everything right, and they know all of these things, and we're learning from them. I don't think if you see any problem with it, that it was them. I think the problem was on our side, because when they took to the streets and we told everybody this is a revolution, our media, our representatives said, well, these are just protests. When they stayed in the streets for month and month, they said, oh, it's not gonna last long. When the children were gassed in schools, New York Times came out and said, oh, these are just psychological, whatever, this is a history. Everything that they were doing over there was right, but our people, they could have taken this regime down already 1 billion times by everything what they were doing. The problem was that on this side, our administrations, our governments were helping actively the regime. They were in the social media, and we still have this problem. Sarah can confirm that we don't get hurt. What is your advice, your expert advice on how we can change our side? How does Sarah get on CNN and tell them what is right and wrong? How do I get on Fox News National and talk about the hostages that were left behind? How can we change our social media and our technology and our policies to stop supporting the oppressors, but help the people of Iran? Because I think we can learn from them. As you said, they are young, they are educated, they're teaching us. The failure that we see is that when you see right now the same thing is happening in Israel to the people of Israel, everybody gets up, everybody stands behind them. Nobody asks, well, what does Hamas think about it? But when this was the Islamic regime torturing our people, putting them in jail, gassing them, killing them, murdering them, all over the news, they're asking, well, the regime said this and that, the regime that and that. There are not two sides. Either you are with the people against terrorists, or you are with the terrorists. So what is your expert advice on what we can change on our side to help?
Within the framework of social media and technology, keeping in mind what she said, whichever wants to address. Mehdi, I think.
So I totally agree. I think Iranians inside Iran, they did whatever they had to do, and they took extreme risk. And I mean, they lost 500 people just last time they protested. They had, I mean, based on some of the numbers we've heard, close to 100,000 people got arrested and tortured, and so they did their part, I think. But there is still a gap, and the gap is part of it, as you mentioned, of course, is the Western government who haven't been supportive sufficiently. Part of it is I would say, Iranian opposition, who has its own challenges and failures. And another part of it, I think, the tactics that I mentioned in terms of we have to really look at how we can better organize and mobilize people inside Iran that would help them to be safer and more effective at the end of the day, because we want to achieve objectives. We want to change that regime. I think the goal is not just for people to come out and then again we will repeat this cycle. We really want to finish this regime. And the question is how to do that, and I believe we really have to look at some of these tactics and use the technology to really make them safer. I mean, a lot of the groups especially leftist groups back in 60s, 70s, worldwide, I mean, they had all sorts of cells and groups and doing all sorts of things when there was no safe connection, communications, and so on. Why in the year 2023, with existence of apps like Signal and so on, why can't we repeat similar things? I mean, so I think these are things we have to look at and see what can we do to enable people to act stronger, to have the resources to make the Iranian government much weaker and ultimately bring down the regime.
I just want to add something also. I sense your frustration because, if not this, what can possibly, be the last straw? We don't know. There's no formula. The stuff that works in other countries is not necessarily the stuff that's going to work in Iran. So I think what is important is, first of all, don't be disheartened. Don't lose faith, because we don't know what will be the final straw. Something will be the final straw. It requires all of the above pressures. It requires internal pressure. It requires external pressure. It requires experts going on various media channels. It requires disruptive technology. It requires all of these things, a sustained effort that has the stamina for the long run, because precisely you don't know which specific piece of that puzzle is going to be the final piece. So I would say it's not a question of blame. People are doing the best they can with what they have in the country. I think there's always, it's always important to be organized. It's always important to have a strategy rather than just kind of flail away, and think, think creatively but purposefully. So if more people, commit to sustained action at whatever level they are, eventually what you're hoping will happen. But it's not a question of blame. It's just a question of not losing hope, staying the course, keeping your eyes on the prize, and it will happen.
Thank you to the panel. Unfortunately, our time is up. I appreciate
Thank you
your
all
time.
very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
We welcome you all to a short break from some much needed coffee.